Now, for those of us who are learning thumb draw or are curious about the Asiatic style thumb draws, there are often questions and nuances about the technique. Most people understand that with thumb draw, you use the thumb. That part's easy. But the other question might be, where exactly do you draw back to? This is the concept of the anchor point, which is widely taught in Western archery, both traditional and modern. But it doesn't seem that traditional Asiatic thumb draw has a set anchor point. Or does it? This ambiguity or confusion is further compounded when you consider that most people don't have access to a place where they can learn or people can teach them how to do Asiatic thumb draw. You will see particular styles like Quiver or Mongolian or Korean traditional archery, which have very long draws and floating anchor points, and you often see people shoot with short anchor points. You may be learning from online sources, for example, Justin Ma from The Way of Archery, do a certain draw and anchor. You might be copying myself. But none of this is the definitively right way of anchoring. Much of it depends on the style that you do, but much more depends on your purpose. It's essential to underline that there is no one single style of Asiatic thumb draw. It's an umbrella term for basically any Eastern style of archery which uses the thumb, which means there'll be variations from Turkish to Arab to Chinese to Japanese to Korean. And all these styles use the thumb draw, but for different purposes, different applications, different contexts, some military, some sporting, some target, some hunting. So the underlying message here isn't so much to copy any particular person or style or length, but to understand why they do so. And underscoring all that is, in most of these styles, it is encouraged that people try to experiment and do what works for them. Unfortunately, it did start raining as soon as I started demonstrating. I do apologize for the noise on the ceiling, but hopefully it doesn't get too heavy. As I was saying before, the historical texts actually discuss a wide range of differences and variations. So there was no prescribed way to shoot. Now, in the case of, for example, Gao Ying and Ming archery, he does prescribe what he thinks is the best way to shoot. But Arab archery covers many different schools and styles and masters and variations. So when people practice thumb draw today, unless you are following a specific style and method, there's a lot of experimentation and exploration. The recognition is that every single person has a different body type. They have different length arms, different heights. So it's not right to say there is one correct anchor point or one correct technique. So that's why we're going to explore how people might have done this and to open up the conversation with you over what might work for you. So first we'll break this down into the two axes. The first is the height of your anchor. The second is the length or the distance of your anchor. As far as length goes, this is really variable depending on your preferred style. Ottoman styles, for example, tend to anchor quite short on the face, on the chin with the thumb. Other styles tend to draw, of course, very long, like past the ear. I'm talking about like Quiver, for example. But there is no one right length. The main factor with the length is not so much where you anchor on your face, but more so how far back your elbow goes. Now, I've made quite a few videos recently talking about back tension and using the elbow to guide the shot, and the same principle applies to Asiatic thumb draw. So as with many styles that we'll learn, whether it's Western or Eastern, people often neglect back tension. So the fixation on the anchor point will result in things like a crooked arm or a stiff wrist. And thumb draw is no exception. People often do this. They'll think, all right, I'm going to anchor at my cheek. They'll draw to their cheek and then shoot. And that seems okay, all right? But remember, the lack of alignment means that there's no control over the left and right variation of the shot. You're not in line. There's going to be a lot of extra movement, even with a thumb draw. And there'll also be a lack of stability because you're relying on your weaker arm muscles to hold the shot, not your stronger back muscles. So regardless of where you anchor, you still need to follow the principle of good back tension. So lead with the elbow, get it all the way back, and then you can execute the shot as you want. And again, exactly worm anchoring isn't so important first. Once you get a comfortable spot, then you can do that. But I want to really practice this. So as you're learning and developing, remember, the anchor can be roughly consistent, but this needs to be very consistent. So think about your alignment first. This is exactly what's taught in, again, Arab archery. It's definitely taught in Gao Ying's manual. This is the whole point of alignment, is to make sure your shoulders are in line, and you can dictate that with your elbow alignment. That is crucial in establishing good form, no matter where your anchor is. This is, by the way, how the long draws get consistent anchor points. Again, you'll see Manchu or Qing style, or the Kudo style with the draw behind the ear, above their shoulder. People will comment and say, oh, well, there's no way you can be consistent with that. To an extent, maybe, but the thing that stops them from going past the anchor point any further is back alignment. It's back tension. So I don't think I draw this any further than I can. Now I'm gonna shoot myself in the hand and do that, right? But in theory, if I could draw a longer arrow, then what would happen is if I draw all the way back past my ear, as soon as I hit that wall with my shoulder blades, that's as far as I go. And you know you can't get past that. So the technique with, again, the long draw technique styles, Kyudo and Manchu, is you go as far as you can here. So you naturally have a wall which you stop pulling past. That's how it's possible for someone doing Kyudo or a Manchu style to establish a stable line and anchor, because physically they've reached the anchor point. The anchor point is not this. The anchor point is the maximum range of motion with their body. Now, of course, with that said, most people don't shoot the really long draws. They might shoot a technique which is an intermediate draw. So it's more towards the cheek or the ear area. And this is where we see more of the familiar anchor points. But instead of using the hand, because we don't use fingers, we can't really use our finger on the mouth or the cheek, we need to use something else. So some people might use the thumb behind the ear or the jawbone, but a lot of people will use the feathers as a reference point. So for me, my preferred point is the feathers against my cheekbone. So I feel the shaft and the feathers rub against my cheek here. That to me is the most natural way I draw. So it fits my size and length. We'll draw it back, feathers on the cheek, tickle for tickle, and then we shoot. So I feel that tickle, tickle, tickle here. You often hear it on my microphone. When you hear that sound, that's where the feathers are brushing against my cheek. So I've been working more on that for consistency, for my length. I just want to get the feathers on my cheek, like that, brush against my cheekbone, and then release. Of course, there's more steps in this process, but just demonstrating my anchor point, that's how I establish consistency for my length. I like the feeling of the feathers here. I don't feel comfortable drawing past this, but that said, everyone's different. I do it this way, doesn't mean you have to do it that way. And I should point out that there is a bow hand anchor. So when people shoot a certain kind of head, or they might have a bit of plastic wrap for tactile feedback, that might be the length right there. So you draw as far as you want here, but you can feel the arrow touching your thumb over here as a sign that you've reached the right length. But with that aside, a lot of techniques and a lot of people prefer having a facial anchor point. That way you can physically remember what length you have. So as far as length goes, as long as you can align correctly, then you can anchor almost anywhere. Again, some styles will have very long open draws where you have your back tension as the maximum for your anchor point. Others have a more facial reference point, but you still have to reach your alignment. So whatever is most natural for you, there's always variation between exact length and height. But on that topic, if you know that length is flexible, how high do you anchor? Now, as far as the height of the anchor goes, historical texts will cover variations. Turkish and Arab texts will cover, for example, the eyebrow level, or the ear level, or the mustache level, or the beard level, and they'll weigh up different pros and cons. But it's worth noting that the way they explain it in historical texts makes sense to the people doing it at the time. So some are suitable for hunting, some are suitable for flight archery, some are suitable for targets. when we apply the same principles in a modern context, they actually make a lot of biomechanical sense. And this principle will also explain where certain styles always anchor at a certain height. So again, with Kyudo, you always see the long draw all the way back to around here, roughly. And again, with the Korean styles or Mongol styles, they'll draw quite low, perhaps even under the chin, depending on the style. So the principle behind this is the same that applies to modern archery. And the principle is, the closer the arrow is to the line of the eye, the easier it is to align on target. And sometimes this is picked up the wrong way by commentators, especially people who don't know about Asiatic thumb draws, where you can have a high anchor. You are allowed to draw. And again, I'm shooting at, say, 1 meter, but even up to 10 meters, I can draw back to eye level, and it'll be exactly in line. So you can draw eye or eyebrow. Eyebrow is more used for low targets, generally not used in shooting, so it's one of the things which is often dismissed even historically. But eye level is completely legitimate because it's just the most natural to align on target. If target's right there, up to 10 meters away, 15 meters, I know it's going to be a straight line because I'm shooting a certain weight bow. It would go straight to around, say, 20 or 30 meters. So I just have to pull it back to my eye, look at target, and let go. So eye level works fine. But I've got a problem, and many of us do. I wear glasses. Now, this of course would not be a historical problem because glasses didn't really exist back then when art was used by the thumb draws. So this is a more modern problem. It can be worked around. This means I can't draw to my eye because my frame is in the way. The best I can do is to draw under my eye. Hence why I tend to use the cheek anchor with my default draw, because while it will be a gap between the target and where I'm looking, at least it's pretty close. So my natural point is right under my eye here, and that allows me to point roughly on target. So with the eye anchor or slightly below the eye, I can probably shoot direct on target to around, say, 20 to 30 meters. About 30 meters, depending on the bow, draw weight, and arrows. I'm pretty much roughly in the center of target. Now, when it comes to further distance, I'm going to have to aim off. And there are two ways to do this, and the same applies to traditional archery. Number one, I keep my anchor point and aim up or down. Or number two is I keep my point on target and I move this up or down. And you might think, hold up, why would you change your anchor point? Isn't the anchor point the most important thing? You've got to keep it the same every single shot. Well, yes, but if you have another reference point which you use to pivot on, then you can change your anchor point. So if I can trace the shaft and I know where the shaft's pointing, I can't really see the tip of the arrow with a thumb draw, but if I can see the same alignment of the shaft, I'm using a point on the bow to look at the target, then if I can keep that on target and change my anchor point, then that will change the elevation. It's the same thing. And as long as I know how far I'm shooting and where I'm anchoring for the alternate anchors, it's pretty much like modern string walking or modern face walking. And like with modern archery, the low anchor points are much more conducive for long distance shooting. Part of the reason why the Olympic anchor is under the chin isn't necessarily because of the stronger anchor point, but because even before sights were a thing, it meant that you can shoot longer distance with a stable anchor point. And again, when you look at the current Mongolian style of archery, they do draw quite low here. Same with Korean archery, they do draw quite low because they're shooting at a long distance target. And they're using the tip of the arrow, or roughly the shaft of the arrow, as a way to look at the target. So that's the reason why certain styles will anchor at certain levels. If they're shooting at a set distance, like Kyudo, which doesn't change distance, then they will always draw at that height, because that's pretty much looking at the target. Align the shaft with the target and it will drive straight there. In other words, styles which focus more on distance shooting, either target shooting a long distance or flight shooting, tend to favor lower anchors because they enable higher angle shots. Whereas styles and techniques or purposes which are more for direct short distance shooting under 50 meters tend to anchor a little higher. And this is where people who have developed their preferred anchor points and technique will begin to understand why it's being done. Because I shoot mostly, say, 30 to 50 meters, I'm comfortable anchoring under my jig over here because I can make the adjustments without too much variation. I've got a steady anchor point. I'm not shooting a very long distance because if I had to do that, I have to aim towards like the top of the target. So I may have to change by going lower for a long distance shot. But again, that's for me to experiment, and that's for you to experiment as well. So to sum up, if you're teaching yourself thumb draw and you're not sure where to anchor, there is no one right answer. You use what works for you, and we encourage that and we celebrate that. For some guiding principles, for length, as long as you get your back tension in alignment, then length is fine. You can short draw, but as long as you get your elbow back all the way, that's fine. If you're long draw, you can hit your wall easier, that's fine too. As far as height goes, make sure it's something which is easily repeatable. People who like using facial reference points like ear or cheek, they might use their thumb or the feathers or a bow hand anchor as a reference point, but the same principle applies. The closer it is to your eye, the easier it is for you to instinctively align on target. If you can't align with your eye because you're wearing glasses or you're shooting a long distance target, then you might feel more comfortable and more natural having a slightly lower anchor. But again, you use what works for you. Anyway, I hope that was helpful. Thank you all for watching, and hopefully we'll see you next time.